Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Black and Gold Friday. Welcome to our last Hawkeye Parent and Family webinar of 2015. My name is Danielle Martinez, and I work in academic support and retention and will be your moderator for today's webinar. We're excited about our session today, Homeward Bound, Managing the Winter Break Transition as we wind down the fall semester and your students get ready to head into winter break. We're very, very fortunate to have Maureen Schaefer, Senior Associate Director of the Academic Advising Center, as our guest today. Some of you may remember her from our previous FERPA and student privacy webinar, or seeing her with your student during new student orientation over the summer. Just a few reminders before we begin. Each webinar is recorded and then posted on the Academic Support and Retention website, so it can be accessed as a later date or viewed by individuals who were not able to attend the live webinar today. Therefore, during the presentation, your mic functions will be muted. Later on, we'll have a question and answer portion, so feel free to type your questions into the box on the side. And we'll also be returning in February of 2016 with a webinar on Paying for Year 2, Financial Aid, Important Dates in the Verification Process. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to Maureen to talk about your students' transition over to winter break.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be with you today, and glad that some of you are able to join us to talk about when your student comes home after their first semester of college. Some of you may have a reference point for this if you experienced it yourself, or if you have older children who have been through this previously, but I'm sure that some of you may be experiencing this for the first time and are probably here to get some information and suggestions on what might lie ahead. During our time together today, let's see if we can advance the slide here. Oh, there we go. We are going to talk about a few different aspects of the student transition home. First, we'll address what it's like for them to transition back into being part of their family. We'll then talk about what is involved in looking back on the fall semester and how things work with grades. I'll offer some tips on how you can help your student plan for spring, as well as making the most of their time during winter break. And of course, at the end, we can address any questions that you have that I didn't mention during the presentation. So let's start by talking about their transition back into being a member of the family living at home. If your student came home for Thanksgiving, you likely got a taste of what it's like to have them home for a little while. You certainly both have gotten used to not living under the same roof for 16 weeks, and it might take a little bit of time to get used to that again. So some suggestions for moving forward with this transition include, first of all, understanding where they're coming from. 16 weeks ago, they experienced a newfound freedom in being able to plan their own day, including going to bed when they want to, getting up on their own. They're used to following their own schedule, as well as living with other people who share similar schedules, most often staying up late, taking naps during the day, and sometimes doing things at hours that to most adults would seem odd. I'm sure you may be like me, and the thought of going out for the night at 10:30 seems a little crazy now, but it's pretty normal for them. Instead of waiting for misunderstandings or issues to occur, it's helpful to set some expectations for their time at home. It's okay to acknowledge with them that while they're on break, you still have to go to work every day. And if they have younger siblings, they will still be in school part of the time. And it's important to talk about what's okay and what's not okay, so they know from the beginning. Open communication can be so important to ensure that there are no misunderstandings. It can also be good to have a conversation early on about their goals or expectations for break, as well as your goals for them. Winter break can get a little long for some students if they're not working. I'll talk a little bit later about some suggestions for things that they do during winter break. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the state of mind that they might be in when you first see them when they come home. Some students had a great fall semester. They transitioned well, they prepared for finals, and they're feeling pretty good about things. And I'm sure you have a sense of that already. Other students may have had a rough transition. They may have had a bumpy adjustment to college level academics, and they have finished finals feeling not so great. But either way, it's all normal, and we want to help to prepare you to help them over break. And I would say perhaps the biggest question from parents might be is, how can I help? because really, no matter how their semester went, I think that you can engage them in important conversation over winter break to help them to make sense of their experience. So let's talk first about if their semester went well. You might ask them some questions about why they think it went well. Some questions to ask you see here on this screen. What did you do well in the fall semester? How did you keep up with your classes? What will you do again in the spring? What might you change for spring? And how did you get involved at Iowa? Those are just some questions that can prompt the conversation. I have found that students who have done well often don't think about the behaviors that have contributed to them doing well. Your questions will help them to process this experience a little more and encourage them to continue with the same behaviors in spring. It's also a nice chance to congratulate them on doing well. No matter how old we get, it's always nice to get some positive encouragement from your parents. Unfortunately, not everyone has a smooth transition to college. Some students will come home a bit discouraged. Helping these students process their experience can be extremely beneficial to them. And I have, again, some suggestions for questions. Just as with students who did well, I would say for students whose semester didn't go well, you can ask, what did go well? It's a nice way to focus a little on the positive and acknowledge that they did do some things well. What did you do that worked? Another good question to help them realize that their behavior has a direct correlation to how things go. Certainly they can point to a few things they did this fall that did work. It can be a good reminder to them to focus on these behaviors and continue them in the spring. Sometimes we find that students did some things well, they just didn't do them enough to have a significant impact on their grades. Spring can be a great fresh start for them to work a little bit more on these behaviors. My favorite question is, if you had September to do over again, what would you do? This question acknowledges that they have 16 weeks of experience under their belt and they likely know what they need to do next time. September is a crucial month in the fall. Unfortunately, they don't realize it when they're going through it, but it's early enough that students aren't feeling the pressure of exams or papers quite yet. But what we find is that students often regret not working harder in September to set themselves up for success in October and November. The same thing will happen in spring. So asking them, what do they want to make sure they do in February to set themselves up for success in March and April can be a great way to go about it. Another question that I really like is, what do you think it would have taken to get an A or B in your classes? This question allows them to think about their behaviors again and how they compare to other students in their classes. What do A students do? Chances are they know someone who did get a better grade, and they may have a sense for how that student studies. If not, suggesting that they think about this can be helpful. It can even be a good starting point for a conversation with a professor or TA in the spring when they go to office hours. I always encourage students to ask professors, what do students who get an A in your class typically do to set themselves up for success? It's through this process that students realize that students who get A's and B's typically put in a lot of time studying, they always go to class, they typically read before class, and they review material on a regular basis, not just before the test. And these are all skills that can be learned and practiced in the spring semester. Another question that I like to ask is about their experiences outside of class. If your semester didn't go well, perhaps it went well academically, but maybe it was the out-of-class experiences that weren't positive. And to help them kind of get a sense for what they want to change in spring can be helpful. And going back to the grade issue, sometimes if grades didn't go the way they wanted, this can be an indication that maybe their major isn't a good fit. Advisors have many conversations with students late in the fall semester and early in the spring semester where they start to question whether or not this is the major that's a right fit for them. That's a very normal process to go through, and we never want students to feel bad about that, but this is what college is about. And we want to be having these conversations early so that if they might want to make some changes to their major or career plans, that we have those conversations right now. I wanted to share a phrase that a colleague of mine at the Advising Center introduced to me. It's a saying from Soren Kierkegaard: life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward. I have found that this phrase is so meaningful to our work with students. And the reason we like to ask students questions and the reason we encourage you to ask them questions is to prompt them to process their experience. And they can do this best if they're looking backwards and can see things a little bit more clearly. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about grades. When your student arrives home sometime during the week of December 14th, they will likely not know their grades yet. The deadline for professors to submit final grades is not until December 23rd. Students will be able to see their final grade report on our Iowa Student Information System that they refer to as ISIS sometime during the day on December 24th. They shouldn't panic if they don't see it early in the day. Our registrar's office has told us that grades will be processed all day on the 24th, so it might not show up until later in the day on the 24th. Now I want to show you a screenshot here of what students see when they're logged into their ISIS account related to grades. Under their student records menu, you can see that they have a couple of different options. On December 24th, they'll be looking at their completed grades, but prior to the 24th, students can click on grades in progress. What this means is that when professors submit final grades, the grades show up in their grades in progress right away, and students actually might start seeing these as early as sometime during finals week. This is simply a listing of the grades that have been reported, but students don't see their overall grade point average or any of the other information that's on their final grade report on this grades in progress screen. They have to wait for final grades to see that information. But if they're really curious about a grade, they can be checking that in the days leading up to the 24th. I did want to mention a few things that could be noted on transcripts depending on how students' grades turn out in the fall. Now, grading policies do vary by college. What I'm sharing with you now is something that shows up for students who are on the Dean's List in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. At the end of their grade report, it will say on Dean's List, and that is if students earn a 3.5 or higher on 12 or more graded University of Iowa hours. This is a great thing. Everyone loves to see this. If your student is in another college, perhaps if they were a direct admit to engineering, nursing, or business, they will need to check with their college about grading policies in their college. On the other end of the spectrum is academic probation. Again, this one varies by college. In the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, they require that students have a 1.85 or above to be in good standing if they have 29 or fewer hours. Students who have earned 30 or more hours, perhaps students who have some transfer credit coming in, need to be at a 2.0 or better to be in good standing. Anything below 2.0 for them is academic probation. Oftentimes, these two notifications, either Dean's List or academic probation, may not show up immediately on their grade report on the 24th. So if your student would think that they could possibly be in either of these categories, I would suggest that they check their grade report again the week of December 28th for those notations to appear. Academic probation in most colleges means that they have a semester to raise their grades to good standing, and if they don't, then they would be up for dismissal from their college. We, of course, don't want this to happen to students, but sometimes it does. And when it does, we really want to provide students with support so that they can get back on track in the spring. So I want to mention some things that we offer to support struggling students in the spring semester. They're definitely going to receive some outreach from us over winter break if they are in the category of students who have grade point average, let's say below a 2.2. Students in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences who are on academic probation will be invited to a spring success meeting that will be held in the first 2 days of the spring semester. We offer 9 of these over the course of 2 days, and at these meetings we talk with students about what probation is, how they can get off of probation, ways that they can set themselves up for success with their spring schedule, and the various resources available on campus to help support them. They'll get a letter mailed to their home address and an email to let them know about attending one of these meetings. We also offer a course called the College Success Seminar for first-year students who have a GPA below a 2.2 for the fall semester. This elective course focuses on getting back on track academically and will cover organization, time management, goal setting, and study skills, among other topics. Eligible students will get a letter sent to their home address telling them about the class and how to enroll. Students who are advised at the Academic Advising Center may also hear from their academic advisor over winter break. So please encourage your student to read their university email so they don't miss any important messages over break. Sometimes our outreach is to encourage them to take advantage of opportunities like the College Success Seminar, and other times we're offering advice for their spring schedule. For example, if a student earned a low grade, such as a D or F in a class in a subject where they're taking the next class in the spring, we might recommend that they retake the first level. This is called a second grade only option and allows them to take the course again and have the second grade calculated into their GPA and the first one taken out. The first grade always shows up on their transcript, but it can make a substantial difference in their GPA to take the lower grade out of their GPA calculation. Advisors will also talk with students about other resources on campus that students can utilize in the spring. So let's talk a little bit about setting themselves up for success in spring with their spring schedule. I thought I would put a picture of flowers on there to encourage all of us that someday we'll see this again. The choices that they make for their spring schedules can be so important in predicting how the spring semester will go for them. As you might know, most students registered for classes before Thanksgiving break. They may have gotten the schedule they want. They may be perfectly happy right now, or they may still be in the process of making some changes. ISIS, again, the Iowa Student Information System, is where students register and make changes to their schedules. It's not uncommon for students to continue to check ISIS over winter break and make small tweaks to their schedules. ISIS is continually changing due to students changing their schedules, and sometimes departments will add seats in classes where there's high demand. I always tell students to keep checking, and there's a good chance that if they're not happy today, that by the time school starts, they will be happier with their schedule. If they change their mind on what classes they'll take, we always recommend that they check in with their advisor. Advisors and students talked about their spring schedule prior to their November registration date. So that may have been earlier in the semester when things were going a little bit differently than they are today. And so it's always a good idea if a student is going to change the plan that they made with their academic advisor, that they check in with their advisor, even dropping them an email over winter break to say, hey, I now have decided on a different class, and do you have any thoughts on this? And that way we can ensure that students are getting the best advice for the classes that they take in the spring. So moving on from grades, I want to talk a little bit about how your students can make the most of their winter break in relation to their long-term academic and career goals. Some students work over break, and that can certainly help the time go by faster, but many students tell us that 4 weeks is a long time and they can get a little bored. If they have some time over break, they might consider doing some things related to their major and career plans. They might be exploring a number of things right now. It's pretty common for students who came in with declared majors to have learned a lot about themselves in the fall, and maybe they're now more definite about their major, or maybe they might be considering other options. Students who are open majors may still be in the midst of their exploration, and winter break really offers a nice opportunity to do some exploring or even getting some experience. There are plenty of things that they can do to explore through university websites, in particular the ones that I have on the screen here. The general catalog is the best place to give them a sense of everything that the university offers. The Advising Center and Career Center websites will help them with ideas for the exploration process. And the link for the majors, minors, and certificates is through the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Now that they have a semester under their belt, it might be nice to revisit this to make sure that they're in the right major and think about things that they can do with their elective hours, such as looking at minors and certificates. I talked with a student yesterday who is a junior who told me that she just changed her major this fall, and she's now in a major that she didn't even know that the University of Iowa had. And so I'm continually reminded that that there's so much to offer here, that students really do need to revisit this process just to make sure that they know that what all of the options are at the university, and to make sure that they're not going to regret anything later by not choosing a major that might be a better fit for them. Students can also gain some real-world experience over winter break by doing a job shadow or volunteering, or even getting some work experience. Job shadows can be arranged by contacting a place of employment they might be interested in. This certainly can be easier if they know someone there, but that doesn't have to be the case. Job shadows really vary in the amount of time. Sometimes students do them ranging from a number of hours to a full day or two. Either way, it's helpful for them to see the environment they might consider working in after college. Volunteering can also be a great way for them to get some exposure to something related to their major or career interests. Students interested in education are often students that we talk to about getting some volunteering experience in a school over winter break, or students interested in healthcare might volunteer at a hospital or a medical clinic. Certainly your community might offer some other options for volunteering, but again, it can be a great experience for students to get some real world exposure to the field of work that they might go into later. And if your student works over winter break, no matter what that job is, it can give them some opportunity to think about what adults do long term. Do they like what they're doing? What aspect of their job might be able to help them? What skills are they building in the part-time job that they have? So all of these things can help contribute to that conversation about long-term major and career plans. And I also encourage students to ask the adults around them, anybody that they encounter over winter break, about their work and their education or training. On the screen here, you see some questions that I think can be great for students to ask. Where do you work? What do you do? What do you enjoy most about your work? How did you get there? What kind of training do you have? Most young people are not used to asking adults about their jobs, but they can learn so much by doing that. If you encourage them to ask relatives, neighbors, friends, parents about their experiences, it can really go a long way to contributing to their developmental process of figuring out what they want to do. And most importantly, what I think they learn through this process is they realize that many people got to where they are by going a number of varied routes, and that for most adults, our past has not been a linear path from here was my major and then I graduated and I worked in this job. For most people, we've learned a lot about ourselves over our adult lives through various experiences, education, work, and so it's good for students to get a variety of responses to where people have come from and how they've landed where they are. So next I want to transition into talking about their goals for the spring semester. Closer to the end of their break, it can be good to talk with students about their goals for the spring. Typically, these will come from your discussions of how the fall went. Certainly processing their fall semester helps to give them a sense for what they want to accomplish in spring. But I find that it can be helpful for parents to have a really intentional conversation with students about what they're going to do when they come back in the spring semester. The reason that's so important is because it helps students to move from kind of this abstract thought to some specific goals and plans. As I was preparing for today, the example that I thought about from my own life is, moving into the holidays, I know that I should probably watch what I eat. I should probably continue exercising. I know that on kind of this larger abstract level, but I don't yet really have any plans for how I'm going to put that into place, which means that it's less likely that it's going to happen. Once I sit down and actually write out some goals for myself, there's a much higher chance that I'm going to be better in the next month with how I approach my exercise and eating. And it's the same thing for your students. If you can talk right now about the goals that they have for spring and put those things into actionable steps, it's much more likely that they're going to make some changes. So going back to what we talked about before, what will you do differently in the spring semester, and talking them through what does that look like on a week-to-week basis. How will you get involved at the University of Iowa in the spring? Some students got really involved in the fall, and we're not worried about them, but it's not uncommon for us to find some students who didn't get involved at all their first semester and really want to in the spring, but it feels kind of overwhelming to think about the 400 plus student organizations we have in deciding what they want to do. The link that I have here on the slide is for the Center for Student Involvement and Leadership. This is a great place for students to start if they haven't been to this website before, because they can learn about all of the amazing opportunities we have at the University of Iowa for students to get engaged on campus and even develop some of the leadership skills that we know are going to be so important to them later on after they graduate from the university. There's a link from this website to a program called OrgSync, where students can look at all of the various student organizations that we offer. And as I said, that can be an overwhelming process of just thinking, they have all of these groups, what do I want to do? But this program organizes them into different categories so students can think about, do I want an organization that's related to my major, or maybe do I want to look into an organization that does volunteer work in the community? But it's a good starting point, and I think when they're home over winter break and they're not thinking about their classes, it's a great time for them to start making plans. And then when they get back to campus, they can start looking at those organizations to find out when are they meeting for the first time in the spring, and what plans will they make for going to one of these meetings and starting to get involved. I think your conversation about spring will likely include what resources they'll use on campus in the spring. If some of their goals for spring include doing some things differently, that might include, I'm going to start going to professors' office hours in the spring, and you can talk through that process. Or if some of the changes they want to make include moving towards exploring majors and careers a little bit more, certainly talking about the resources available to them and making plans for using them early in the semester can be helpful. It's amazing once the spring semester starts how fast the semester can go, and before they know it, it's going to be April and students will be registering for their fall classes. And a student who still needs to spend some time exploring majors and careers might feel overwhelmed in April if they don't do some of this work early on. So I often encourage students to make some plans in small goals. So maybe by the end of January to make an appointment with the Career Center. Maybe take one of the career assessments. Find out what the Career Center offers for students early on in their experience here, because they're definitely available for students in all 4 years, not just at the end. But make a plan then to have a conversation with their advisor early on. Advisors often give students what we call advising homework, things that they can do on their own, and that can kind of move this process along so that by the time they register for classes in the spring, they might feel better about their long-term plans. But all of this, the questions that you'll ask, the goals that you'll ask them about for spring will help them to start thinking about how they're going to continue to make the most of their first year. Because what we don't want is for the first year to zip by and have them say, gosh, I wish I had gotten more involved, or I wish I had done this or that. We want them to really come back and be ready in the spring to take advantage of the things that are available to them and make the most of their outside of class experiences as well. So I know that there are lots of things that you'll be talking about in the coming weeks with your student, and likely there are some things that I haven't mentioned. So I think we want to move into some question and answer time.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Maureen. And so, as Maureen said, we'll move into the question and answer portion of our webinar. And please remember that we have lots of folks attending today. So we're unable to answer about specifics of your student's experience, but can provide information that might be helpful in guiding your student. As a reminder, if you have a question, type it into the question box on the side, and then we'll read the question aloud so all participants can hear and Maureen can answer. If you're unable to type your question, you can use the mic function and just let us know and we can unmute you. If you are unable to get your question answered during the webinar, we'll follow up with you via email to make sure that we answer your question. So our first question is, How do students and parents resolve the conflicts that occur when the student must now commit to house rules again, such as things as curfews or chores or other things?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if I knew the exact answer to that? I think this is a great question and something that as you're anticipating your student coming home, it's really good to think about. My personal opinion here is that we go back to setting up those expectations and just communicating things from the very beginning, because lots of the things that I've heard about over the years where there are issues when students go home go back to everyone not talking, so that a student might go out, they come home at 1 o'clock in the morning and they're in the kitchen making a snack, and the parents are waking up going, we have to work tomorrow, but they didn't talk about it in advance. So setting some ground rules from the very beginning so that everybody understands and is on the same page can be really, really helpful. And my own personal opinion as a parent is that it's my house, so I think that I can set my own rules, you can set your own rules, but treating your student and acknowledging the fact that they have had some independence, I think, can be helpful in helping them to understand where you're coming from, but also that you have a household to run for the 4 weeks that they're home, and so these are why we need to have these rules in place. But I don't think there's one set answer for everyone.
So,
Oh, good question.
oh yeah. So this question is where their student can find out about more sort of non-party or alcohol-free social activities that happen in the spring.
I think that is a great question. I really do, and I would be curious, if your student were wondering that, it would be great to have a conversation about what they have done, what they have looked at so far. I think, for those of us at the university, and Danielle can answer this too, I think that there are a variety of options for this. There is a website called After Class that I often refer students to, and it has a day-by-day throughout the semester things going on campus. And in fact, one of the classes that I teach, we require that students look at this calendar and participate in some campus activities. And students who get in the habit of checking After Class, the website, all the time, are often really surprised at how many things are constantly going on our campus that can give them ideas. I think that Center for Student Involvement and Leadership website that I referred to before can be really helpful too. Mm-hmm. And even just being in our Iowa Memorial Union, where the Center for Student Involvement and Leadership is, can be helpful to put them in the right place, to be seeing advertisements, to see posters, to see electronic signs that talk about things that are going on a regular basis. Danielle, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I would say also if the student lives on campus, engaging in sort of their living learning community activities, so the programming that they do there. Even tonight we have a casino night going on campus, and it doesn't start, it starts at 9 p.m. and goes till 1 in the morning. And so, and that's hosted by a wide variety of folks, from Student Health and Wellness to our Center for Student Involvement and Leadership, our Women's Resource and Action Center. And so lots of things happen on campus. And so the after class was definitely the first place I would go to. And then the second place I would go to is sort of the Center for Student Involvement and Leadership has a calendar that they sort of maintain, and our campus activities boards does lots of evening movies and getting engaged in clubs and organizations. They often will host things on the weekends, whether that's, in the fall. I know they do trips apple picking, in the spring that they sometimes do fun things on the river. So those could be options for your student too. It looks like our next question is around some uncertainty around off-campus living. And so this transition of, a first-year student is trying to make the decision around living on campus or off campus, and then about making deposits, finding roommates, and not knowing much about Iowa City or where to go and where to look and what resources are available. Do you want me to? I'll go ahead and answer that one because we deal with that one a lot in our office. And so there is an off-campus housing website and programs through the Center for Student Involvement and Leadership. And so if you go to the UIowa.edu website, and if you just type in off-campus housing, it comes right up. And there's subleases that are on there. So if your student's going to stay here over the summer, students can post, they can find roommates. It has a great resource. Our student legal council or student legal services also does an off-campus housing fair. They'll start doing them in early spring to talk a little bit about what does it mean to sign a lease, what does it mean to have a co-signer, and then if your student wants to reapply through the housing website, we always encourage them to go to the housing and dining website for the reapplication dates because those will be coming up pretty shortly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question about applications for residence halls for next fall. I'm going to look at those dates. We're going to have to look those up. I don't know them off the top of my head. Let's see. Just looking through the list of questions to see if we can answer them. So there's a student who continues to struggle with homesickness, and that when they come home for winter, not wanting to go back. And we actually see that quite a bit and get a lot of phone calls. Maureen, how would you coach that family?
Yeah. If this was somebody I knew, I mean, my first thought that comes to my mind is that this is still very normal. When I talk to student groups late in the fall semester and I bring up homesickness, I always talk to them about how there's this facade that everybody looks like they're completely happy and that they feel 100% at home here and everything's great, but that you really don't know what's really going on. And I almost feel sorry for students in this day and age with social media because they have an added layer that we didn't have when we were growing up. In terms of this facade that everybody looks like they're completely happy. So number one, I would say to share with this student that the process of transitioning to college is not over. I mean, it's been 16 weeks, and so that transition continues in the spring. I would ask that student questions about what they've done to make the University of Iowa feel more like home this fall, because sometimes it goes back to that campus engagement idea of they didn't feel their place to get involved or to make some connections on campus. And so setting some goals for spring can be important. How can you get involved? For some students, getting a job on campus might be a great connection for them to connect them with other students and employees of the university. For other students, it might be joining a student organization. But I don't think that this is out of the ordinary. I do think it's something that people don't tend to talk about. But it's okay to still be homesick. And the big question for that student is this something that we can work through? Is this something that with some effort, you're going to feel like you can make this place home? Or do you feel like a change is really necessary? And there are people on campus that can talk with a student like that. I mean, in addition to your conversations at home over winter break, but for that student, having more of a set plan for their goals for spring can be very important. Because I can imagine that might be hard to say, I don't want to go back to this place. But there is hope.
So I want to circle back to the reapplication for the residence halls. So we did some digging and we found that reapplication begins in late January. We don't have the exact date, but all students who live on campus will receive an email in their UIowa email account for the information about reapplication, and this will have the specific date and time that they can reapply. Priority is based on semester hours, which means that returning students have sort of the first pick of where they want to live before new students come to the institution. Um, so there's a question about helping a student overcome relying so much on social media and getting involved on campus activities. So I'm going to ask the person who asked the question to help us clarify. Is the student on social media too much and so they're not getting involved in activities, or that they have to be on social media to get involved? Or could you help us clarify what you mean?
And while you do that, I think I'll go back to one of the previous questions, which was a follow-up from what I talked about with the homesickness. For students who want to take advantage of the university counseling service in the spring semester, most definitely this is an option for them. We, in many of our offices, in Danielle's office, in my office, we're often talking with students about the fact that we have the university counseling service available as a support for them. Scheduling an appointment earlier in the spring semester is better. As the semester goes on, they tend to get busier, so that might be a great goal to schedule an appointment in the spring to start that support system right away. I think that's a great idea.
So, okay, we got some clarity. Yeah, social media with old friends. So taking away that incentive for them to get involved on campus because they're still so connected with their past that they haven't really engaged in the present.
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. I think there are going to be books and articles about this in years to come. I imagine there are PhD students studying this right now. Again, going back to just how different it was when we were in college. You're right. I mean, social media allows them to stay connected and feel very connected to people at home without even leaving their room. And so if that were my student, I think I would want to have conversations over the winter break about this, acknowledging this balance of staying connected with people from your past, but also making the most of your time at the university, and to ask them about what ways are they engaging with people here. Sometimes when we start to talk about major and career plans, that leads us to think about the job search that students are going to go through in a few years, and it leads us to think about the resume and what are you going to have on your resume when you graduate. And that can help you loop back around to what are you doing at the University of Iowa that you could put on a resume right now, and just starting that conversation, because then a first-year student who hasn't really been involved at the University of Iowa can kind of say, oh, I really haven't done anything yet that I could probably put on a resume. And then talking about that's why we want you to get involved at the university. Of course, we know because we want them to be engaged and be happy here. But the other piece and the tangible piece that a student can look at is, wow, in 3.5 years, I'm going to be writing a resume and competing with other people for jobs. What do I want to have on there? And that can be the incentive to help them move towards setting some goals for getting involved in spring. What would you say, Danielle?
I think one of the things that we talk about with students in our office is sort of broadening your network. And so social media is great to stay connected with folks, but it also only takes you so far, right? And so there are times during the day where we might just need to process something verbally, or we might want to engage with somebody about what's going on in our class or things like that. And so without a network of support here at the university, it's really hard. And then when you leave here, sort of what network did you build while you were here to add to your social media network that you might have had previously to here? So I think about sort of network and systems of support, and sometimes that can help reframe things for students. We're going to take one last question. And so we are looking at a student who has had a part-time job to allow them to get, had not had a part-time job, sorry. Should their family encourage them to look at a part-time job? And how should they do this without sounding pushy?
Yeah.
And finances are tight, and so looking that the student might be financing their own education.
Yeah. I think Danielle has some great data to share with you about student jobs, because oftentimes students enter the university and say, oh, no, I'm not going to work. I'm just going to focus on academics. And sometimes there's this idea out there that working is bad. We actually have data from our own students about the impact that working has on their college experience. And I'll let Danielle share that.
Yeah, so we find that students who work anywhere, usually part-time jobs, so 1 to 20 hours, tend to do better academically. They have a higher GPA than students who don't work at all. And then students, obviously, who work more than 20 hours, so they might be overextending themselves. But students who work at all tend to do better than students who don't work. And we see that because they're building, time management skills. They're probably developing that network of support with peers at their job or their supervisors, especially if it's on campus. They might be getting to know faculty or staff around the campus or other campus resources. So we highly, highly recommend that students work. And so sometimes we talk a lot about the benefits of working, as not to then sound pushy around that you need to be getting a job around finances, because we know that financial need is very real for most people. Higher education is expensive, and so we want folks to be in a place where they can really look at the affordability of Iowa for them. So, setting up some time to really look at what jobs would be a good fit for your student. So not just saying, cast a net for anything and everything, but talking about what might be meaningful experiences to them and what transferable skills do they want to look at. So, I think of if a student is in a communication major or public relations, something as simple as being a barista or a waitress or anything like that, learning to talk with people from different backgrounds and to use those skills and then market themselves in the future. That can really be beneficial for students to use our Pomerantz Career Center. And we have a system on campus called Hire a Hawk, where students can log in, they'll create a resume, they can meet with somebody and get their resume approved, and then they have access to this University of Iowa job board, which all University of Iowa job postings are available, as well as many of our community members and alumni post jobs there as well. So it's a really great resource.
And I wanted to add something too, that our student employment office that falls under financial aid at the University of Iowa has this great program and a class that students can enroll in who have jobs on campus. And the class helps them to think about the experience that they're getting as a student employee and the skills that they're developing and how that will transition into skills that they can use in their job search beyond graduation. And it's a newly created program and has just been really well received in the recent past. And I think it's great because sometimes students think, let's say for example, we have students at the advising center who answer the phone at our front desk and greet visitors when they come in. A student might think, oh, I just have this little job. All I do is sit at a front desk. Well, we can talk with them about, no, you're working autonomously, you're developing communication skills, you have to have problem-solving skills to be answering a phone and dealing with people in person. And so a student who has a job on campus and then takes this class as well can really have some help from a caring adult to kind of help them think about the skills that they're developing. The program is called STEP. Is it called Iowa STEP? Students to Employed Professionals. So if students are interested in that, or you can tell your student that you heard about it, Students to Employed Professionals. It helps them to be more strategic in thinking about the skills they're learning through a job. So I definitely know it's a conversation that lots of people have. And as a parent myself, I know I will have that in my mind about the balance between academics and working. But there's no doubt that if the hours are reasonable, that it can really benefit their education and not take away from it.
So that is all the time we have for today. We want to thank you all for joining us, but especially thank you to Maureen for taking time out of her day to present with us. All the webinars will be posted online at uc.uiowa.edu. UIowa.org/family-resources. If we were unable to get to your question during the webinar, we'll follow up with you via email to answer your question. And additional questions can be sent to uc-retention@uiowa.edu for a response from a University of Iowa staff member. Please join us back in the new year for Paying for Year 2, Financial Aid Important Dates and the Verification Process on Friday, February 5th, 2016. Wow, I can't believe we're already there. From noon to 1, hosted by Academic Support and Retention, Student Financial Aid. Thank you so much, and we hope you have a great rest of your Friday, and best of luck to our Hawkeyes in the big game tomorrow.
Woohoo!
On Iowa, and go Hawks.